Main event of the evening.
These days are Hello and welcome to These Days Are Ours, a Happy Days podcast. I'm Peter.
And I'm Joe.
And today, you're discussing episode 5 of The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang, Westward Whoa.
Okay, Peter, tell us what happens in Westward Whoa.
The time machine is hurtling towards the American Old West, and Richie, interested in the time period, tries to slow the machine down to get a closer look at the era.
Sheriffs, outlaws, cattle rustlers. That's real interesting, Rich.
Unfortunately, the lever he pulls is the one that stops the machine completely. Cupcake goes outside to see where they landed, and is spooked by the sight of horses, which apparently have gone extinct by the 25th century.
Be careful, Fonz! They look vicious!
The gang leaves the stable they landed in and head to the town's saloon. On their way, they notice a wanted poster for a criminal named Big Jake, who looks identical to Fonzie. Naturally, everyone in the saloon is terrified of the man who they think is the infamous outlaw.
So, like, what's going on?
The exception is Diamond Sal, saloon singer, who dips the man she thinks is her boyfriend into a kiss. She also orders Mr. Cool to go play the piano. Yes, the doll.
Give us some music. Yeah, you. Piano's over there.
Sheriff Toby Todd enters to arrest Big Jake, and Cupcake tries to stop him, only to accidentally transport Richie and Ralph into a pair of barrels without their clothes. They get dressed again, and go down to the jailhouse to break Fonzie up before the vigilante mob can get to him. Diamond Sal attaches a rope to one of the bars, and the other end to a horse's saddle, so when it gallops away, the wall collapses.
That crowd will tear Big Jake to pieces if we don't spring him from that cell.
That was either a very strong force or a very weak prison. That's when the real Big Jake arrives, fresh off robbing the bank, and none too pleased to see Fonzie kissing his gal.
Never let me see your face in Motherlode again.
He and Sal ride away, leaving Fonzie and the gang to the mob. They escape narrowly, and Sheriff Todd swears to catch them.
My jail, he's ruined it. I'll get that outlaw now if it's the last thing I do.
Richie, Ralph, and Mr. Cool, pretending to be prospectors, go to the printer's office to spread word of a massive gold claim.
Out at the old bottomless mine.
That mine played out long ago. Nothing there but a big hole in the ground now.
That's what we thought. And then we found this.
So when he comes to collect, the gang will be waiting for him at the mine. Sure enough, he arrives, but while Fonzie, Cupcake, and Mr. Cool are hiding in a minecart, it gets pushed down into the mine. Richie and Ralph try to stall Big Jake.
What would you say if we told you there isn't any gold, Big Jake?
I'd say your prayers.
While Fonzie manages to stall the minecart and send it back up the track. They return, just as Big Jake has left with bags of what he thought was full of gold dust, but were actually just sand, with holes for easy tracking. They find Big Jake and Diamond Sal discussing their plan to rob a stagecoach of its silver shipment tomorrow.
10,000 in silver being shipped to Frisco.
And it all could be ours.
Yeah.
They decide to set another trap for Big Jake by fixing up a broken down stagecoach, which Cupcake manages to pull off with her powers, aside from accidentally summoning a clown and elephant.
Hey, Cupcake, do something about them, will ya?
Sure, Fonz. Sorry, Fonz.
They ride into town, and Big Jake takes the bait, while Fonzie loses control of the stagecoach. Cupcake makes their horses disappear, but the coach has picked up so much momentum that it doesn't matter. They careen into town, Big Jake on their trail. Luckily, they crash into a massive pile of hay. With Fonzie and Big Jake in the same place, the sheriff decides to let them handle it.
I'll just leave you boys to settle this alone.
And they decide on a showdown at high noon. Fonzie chooses lassos, or lassos, as the weapon of choice.
Lassos?
Lassos?
And easily ties Big Jake and hangs him on the hands of the clock tower. Diamond Sal hits on Fonzie, so Cupcake telekinetically tosses her into a barrel of water before the gang returns to the time machine.
1957, here we come. This time for sure. I hope.
Thank you, Peter. That was Westward Whoa. It first aired back on December 6th, 1980. The Fonz and the Happy Days Gang was followed by a new episode of the Richie Rich Scooby-Doo Show. In this episode, Scooby's adventures include Scooby Ghosts West and Scooby's Bull Fright. CBS aired the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner Show, and NBC aired a new episode of the Flintstone Comedy Show. In this episode, Fred and Barney go prospecting for gold, but some thieves try to take their gold away from them. Peter, of those three choices, what are you watching?
Yeah, I'm probably just going to go with Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner again.
I might give the Flintstone Comedy Show a try this week, just for variety's sake. Westward Whoa was directed by George Gordon, Carl Urbano, and Rudy Zamora. It was written by Barry Blitzer, Ray Parker, Dwayne Poole, and Tom Swale. As for songs this week, I am 90% sure that Frank Welker sings Help Me Rhonda by the Beach Boys when Mr. Cool walks into the saloon. We also hear a bit of Oh My Darling Clementine on the soundtrack.
In a cavern, in a canyon, da-da-da-da-da-da. A song with no recognizable merit whatsoever.
As with most traditional Western ballads, its origins are complicated and obscure. The melody may have been Spanish in origin, popularized by Mexican miners during the gold rush. The lyrics were added in the 1880s, but based on a poem from the 1860s.
It's one of those songs that it feels like everybody knows. I don't know if that only applies to Americans or to the rest of the world as well. But yeah, it's a song that I always knew. I do think it's kind of funny that it's actually a song about Clementine dying.
Clementine has no luck in the song. As for cultural and historical references this week, the episode's title is a reference to the expression Westward Ho. This catchphrase comes from 19th century England and originally appeared on the sides of boat taxis in the Thames River. It was also the title of an 1855 novel by Charles Kingsley. The time machine flies through the 1840s, and Richie says it's the Wild West.
Is there something special about that period, Richie?
Are you kidding? It's the Wild West.
Historians generally say that the Wild West, a period of violence and lawlessness during America's westward expansion, peaked from 1865 to 1895. So 1840 is maybe a little too early for this kind of story. Peter, have stories of the Wild West ever fascinated you or been part of your life?
I liked some Westerns, but they were never like a huge part of my childhood or adolescence. I think I always held the genre at a bit of a distance because of the fact that an underlying motif of a lot of Westerns is, isn't it great that we are taking over this land that somebody else already lived on for ourselves? And some Westerns deal with that, and many of them do not.
This episode almost completely sidesteps that issue, except for one example that we will get to soon. When you're a kid, some of the movies and TV shows and cartoons that you take in are Western themed. I didn't avoid Westerns, but I was never really enthusiastic about the genre either. Ralph wants to go back to 1957 Milwaukee so he can enjoy girls, banana splits, and drive-in movies.
Girls, banana splits, drive-in movie.
The banana split was invented in 1904 in Pennsylvania by an optometrist. Very appropriate for Ralph Malph. As for drive-in movies, they started in 1933 in New Jersey. I have never had a banana split in my entire life. Have you?
No, because I don't like the taste of bananas.
I don't either.
I want a banana.
Stop it, Alvin.
I have attended one drive-in movie. Have you ever gone to a drive-in movie?
No, I haven't.
Some friends and I went to see the movie The Crow with Brandon Lee at the drive-in. That was the one drive-in movie that I saw. Mr. Cool briefly dons a 10-gallon hat.
9 more gallons and I'll have me a hat.
Contrary to legend, these were not the preferred headgear in the Old West. Men back then were more likely to wear top hats or bowlers. Fonzie and his pals find themselves in a fictional town called Motherlode.
Motherlode Stables established 1841.
I'm guessing the name is a reference to the California Motherlode, a line of gold deposits in the Sierra Nevada foothills of Central California.
He hit the Motherlode. No. He found some gold down.
No. It was discovered during the California Gold Rush in the 1850s. Do you think there's any gold left there?
Probably like molecules of it.
Do you think there's somebody still out there still prospecting?
I assume.
Ralph is concerned about running into Jesse James, Billy the Kid, the Dalton Gang, and Geronimo.
But what if we run into Jesse James, or Billy the Kid, or the Dalton Gang, or Geronimo?
Jesse James was not even born until 1847, and he didn't start his criminal career until after the Civil War. He and his infamous gang operated in numerous states, Texas, Kansas, West Virginia, and Iowa, but never got anywhere near gold mining territory. Billy the Kid came along even later. He was born in 1859 and became an infamous outlaw in the 1870s before being shot down at the age of 21 by Pat Garrett in 1881. The Dalton Gang didn't start until the 1890s, and their reign of terror was brief, about 2 years. As for the Apache medicine man Geronimo, he was very much alive at the time of this story, having been born in 1829 in Arizona. and was a feared and much respected military leader, but his efforts were concentrated on the American and Mexican military. Did you think it was odd that Geronimo was lumped in with Jesse James, Billy the Kid, and the Dalton Gang?
Yeah, that's kind of uncomfortable. I assume they only did it because they were thinking of famous Western people who had skirmishes with the law, but I think it's fair to say that Geronimo's skirmishes with the law were much more justified than those other guys.
The main villain of this episode, Big Jake, takes his name from a 1971 John Wayne movie.
When John Wayne became Big Jake, he became forever Big Western Entertainment.
Meanwhile, Diamond Sal takes just about everything, her appearance, her voice, her personality, from actress and playwright Mae West.
I want to thank you for those beautiful flowers. They were lovely. And don't forget, come up and see me sometime.
In fact, one of West's most infamous plays was called Diamond Lil, and it was set in the 1890s. Having women of shady reputation or dubious character have the voice of Mae West was a cartoon cliche from the 30s to the 1980s and possibly beyond. Have you ever seen cartoon characters who talk like Mae West before?
I know that I have, but I can't remember any off the top of my head.
I didn't really start noticing this cliche until I started watching a YouTube series called Saturday Morning Cartoons, in which the panelists watch old Saturday morning cartoons, and they start pointing out all the Mae West voices that you hear in old cartoons. Do you have any particular feelings about Mae West?
I think it's really neat that she became a movie star when she was in her 40s. I feel like that's considerably rarer nowadays, where you start as a movie star much younger. Especially if you're a 40-year-old woman, you're going to have a lot of obstacles because of ageism and misogyny. I think a big part of that is the fact that she had become famous a different way. She'd gotten her start on Broadway, so there is that. I'm also very, very fond of the rock and roll albums that she did, which are maybe not exactly good, but I think it's nice that she was trying to stay current.
What's that, honey? Oh, you want to know the best way to hold a man? The best way to hold a man is in your arms.
The saloon in this episode has swinging doors and a player piano. Some saloons in the Old West did have swinging doors, but only the ones in very warm climates. And even the ones with swinging doors would usually have a second set of doors that could be closed and locked. Some saloons did have those self-playing pianos as well, but those didn't even exist until the 1890s. Richie and Ralph are seen wearing only barrels. This cartoon cliche, usually to represent bankruptcy, seems to date back to a 1931 Max Fleischer cartoon. And I was curious, do people today still recognize that cartoon cliche of just wearing a barrel, or has that passed into history and people don't know what that is anymore?
People know what it is, but it's not a joke that people in the modern era make anymore, but it's still familiar if you watch old cartoons.
The sheriff lets us know that this story is happening in the Arizona Territory.
This whole Arizona Territory knows you when they see you.
But Arizona didn't become a territory until 1863. Arizona became a state in 1912. Big Jake's alleged crimes include claim jumping.
Looks like your bank robbing and claim jumping are finally catching up with you.
That's falsely laying claim to a piece of land, especially when that land is rich with minerals. There is a great movie about claim jumping called The Baron of Arizona, starring Vincent Price as a claim jumper named James Revis. Big Jake tells Fonzie, "This town ain't big enough for the both of us."
This town ain't big enough for the both of us.
This famous Western cliche may have originated in a 1932 film called The Western Code, starring Tim McCoy. Big Jake challenges Fonzie to a showdown at noon. Showdowns were rare, but not unheard of in the Old West. Generally, however, they were spontaneous and did not follow any rules like you see in movies or TV shows. The 1952 movie High Noon, starring Gary Cooper, popularized the trope of showdowns occurring at noon.
Someone's gonna be murdered in a duel in the sun on the stroke of high noon.
As for the showdown that they choose lassos. The word lasso is generally pronounced lasso in America and lasso in England and Australia. Hanna-Barbera went with the English pronunciation. Do you support their choice, going with lasso rather than lasso?
I think it's a weird one, because like you said, that's the British pronunciation, and this is set in the American West. I don't know why they're saying lasso. Maybe it's like a soda pop thing, where some parts of America say lasso, and you've got a few pockets of places that say lasso.
Possibly. Other observations this week. Okay, I have no idea how the time machine works. Are they controlling it or are they not controlling it, Peter?
They're not controlling it, but they can sort of push it and prod it in the right directions. And it's a temperamental machine anyway, so it frequently does the opposite of what the people inside of it actually want it to do.
And as you mentioned, it looks like horses are going to become extinct in the next 400 years.
I've never seen one.
Never seen a horse?
Don't forget, I'm from the 25th century, Ralph.
That is really sad, especially since they've been around for about 2 million years. They've been around for way longer than humans. What's going to happen to horses in the next 400 years?
Maybe some kind of horse flu that's super contagious and that human beings are afraid of catching, so they kill all the horses.
Horse-demic. I am copywriting that phrase right now.
What I'm slightly more confused about is Cupcake not recognizing horses at all. I understand being scared of them. They're an unfamiliar animal, and horses are even scary to me, someone who knows that they still exist. But she just doesn't recognize them at all, even though horses have been integral to pretty much all of human art ever, because horses have been important to humanity, because they were how we got around for millennia.
There's not one horse in this whole country. There's something basically wrong with that.
Fonzie is briefly incarcerated in this episode. That makes 5 episodes in a row where the characters wind up behind bars. Do you think they're going to be locked up in every single episode of the show ever?
Maybe. I don't know. It's possible that it will be, given that the show is very formulaic, as we have discussed. I think in some ways that's kind of a good thing, because you generally know what to expect from the show. And except for the racist ones, I don't think any episode of the show is worse than any other.
Mr. Cool undergoes a tremendous amount of physical abuse in this episode. The saloon doors, the stampeding crowd, the printing press, the stagecoach collapsing, etc. He's literally crushed by an elephant at one point. Do you think the makers of the show have it in for Mr. Cool and want to see him suffer?
Maybe they do. Maybe at this point they've reached the point where, like, we can't think of anything for this character to do except suffer and be attracted to human women, because in this episode he's also like, ooh, look at Diamond Sal. She's not into it.
In this episode, Cupcake goes back to being jealous of women who show interest in Fonzie, and at least until the end, Fonzie and the gang are back to being dismissive of Cupcake and treating her like a nuisance. I thought they were especially mean to Cupcake for most of this episode. They're constantly insulting her and telling her she screws up everything.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a shame. Cupcake has a weird level of pathos for a very silly character from a very silly show. It's hard not to feel sorry for her, even though all of this is kind of her fault. Or because all of this is kind of her fault.
Speaking of Cupcake, I'm still keeping track of things that Cupcake says. Her catchphrases in this episode include Neptune's moons, shooting stars, cosmic comets, cosmic calamities, moon craters, suffering Saturn, moon craters again, and cosmic calamities again. I think there was only one new one, or one that I didn't remember from other episodes, and it was suffering Saturn. Are the catchphrases working on you better over the course of the series, or are they wearing off on you, or did they never work for you?
The catchphrases are fun, and I still think they're fun. We've got like 20 more episodes to go. It's possible that by then I'll find them annoying, but I'm still at the point where I find them charming in a kitschy way.
I only this week realized that they sound like the Lucky the Charms leprechaun.
Pink hearts, yellow moons, orange stars, green clovers, and blue diamonds.
I normally keep track of the times when Mr. Cool makes things better and makes things worse. This week, he didn't really do much of either. He is sort of a help when he uprights the stagecoach, but he does that by accident. So I can't say he was a help or a hindrance to this episode. But Peter, were there any outstanding Happy Days fashions in Westward Whoa?
I did like Diamond Sal's whole saloon girl getup. It's fancy, but it allows for freedom of movement, and it's also sexy. I dig it.
So, Peter, I will ask that age-old timeless question. Was this episode any good?
Yeah, this was a moderately fun one. I don't think it's my favorite episode of the show so far. It's not as enjoyably bonkers as the episodes that I like better. Like we've said, it doesn't with the formula too much, so it is still pretty enjoyable.
I enjoyed it too, even though it wasn't my favorite episode either. I'm not all that enthused about Western stories. A lot of times my enthusiasm for these episodes depends on how I feel about the particular genre that they find themselves in that week. Western stories aren't a great source of fascination to me, so I was never going to make this my most favorite episode of the show. I I was surprised that it took them this long in the Happy Days franchise to do an episode where Fonzie meets his evil twin or somebody who looks like him, because it seems like that happens on sitcoms all the time, or used to happen on sitcoms all the time, where people would run into lookalikes for themselves. It took them until 1980 and the animated series for that to happen to Fonzie. Did you think that should have happened on the live action series at least once?
Yeah, it should have. We could have had Fonzie versus Fonzie.
The only note I would have given them on this episode is that Henry Winkler should have also been the voice of Big Jake.
I did like Big Jake's voice a lot. It's very growly and shouty, but it would have also been fun to hear Henry Winkler do an evil voice.
The other thing that I've wanted to see for this entire series is for Mr. Cool to have an evil twin called Mr. Cruel, and he would have a black twirly mustache, and he would be sort of like a gremlin, and he'd push a boulder down on top of you or something.
Oh my God. Somehow Mr. Cool is still less useful.
If we ever get an evil Mr. Cool, then I would be perfectly happy. But I basically enjoyed Westward Whoa. I don't know that I enjoyed it as much as the Happy Days Westward Ho. What was that called? Westward Ho?
Yeah, and that was the one where Fonzie decided to try and ride an angry bull so that they could save the ranch, and Richie has to run in and save Fonzie so that he doesn't get crushed, and it's great.
That was a lot of fun. That also had a runaway stagecoach in it, so Richie Cunningham has had 2 runaway stagecoaches in his life, which, how has that happened to a Midwestern kid? It happened to him twice. I would say definitely watch the Happy Days live action one first, rather than this one, but this one is a worthy successor, so don't skip over it if you're watching Fonz and the Happy Days Gang. So, Peter, how can people keep up with us and find out about all the wonderful things we are doing?
Listeners can follow me on Blue Sky at petervolfront.bsky.social.
They can follow me on Blue Sky at joeblevins.bsky.social. They can find this podcast online at thesedaysaroours.libsyn.com, and they can email us with questions, comments, and concerns at thesedaysaroourspodcast@gmail.com. So, Peter, what do we have on the docket next time we talk?
Next week, we are going back to Asia. This time, we are going to ancient China in the episode Ming Fu to You, and I'm hoping that it'll be less racially problematic than Arabian Nights.
I am not holding out a lot of hope for that one because I have seen some clips from this upcoming episode.
Oh dear.
See you later, alligator.
In a while, crocodile.
Drove those ducklings to the water, yep, rock. Every morning like 9 a.m. Got hung up on a splinter, klug 'em up. Fell into the foamy brine, dig that crazy clementine, man.
Ooh, look at that.